Welcome to Seahawks Chat Blog live stream here with Rob and Jeff Simmons. We're going to be having a look at the Monday Night Football game against Detroit. Hopefully, Jeff, it will be a more entertaining game than the last couple of NFL games that I've watched, which were the watch back of the Dolphins-Seahawks game and the game last night between the Giants and the Cowboys. There's too many flags, and the referees need to just butt out a little bit. And then let's watch a good game of football. So we're going to talk about it. I want to start, though, with the Brady Henderson article that came out this week on Macdonald. It's a fascinating read, Jeff, and it paints a picture of this being a very different Seahawks than the one that was led by Pete Carroll. What were your main takeaways from that article?
It was a fantastic read, number one. But main takeaways, how if you don't come away out of that just like super impressed with Macdonald, and I think this season to me has been about like how buttoned up this guy is, how different he is than Pete, how much he's on their detail. It really just gave you insight into who he is, because he comes off kind of vanilla sometimes in press conferences, but like hearing that they're like running the Ravens conditioning test, and you got to remember this guy was been around both Harbaugh brothers. He's had a very different vibe than Pete Carroll. So a lot of the years, I know me and you were upset by just like the team's lack of attention and details, just how easygoing things were, how they were starting every year just like sloppy, and you see how buttoned up this guy is. And that article just really emphasized like the fact that he reamed that guy out for not finishing the conditioning test. And I don't know if you've heard about this Ravens conditioning test before, but like I've heard Justin Forsett talk about it. I've heard Earl Thomas talk about it. And it's like apparently one of the more insane tests. And the fact that the Seahawks out there and this guy is just bringing the Ravens over here. Like if you couldn't come away out of that article just super impressed with Macdonald, what he's all about, who he is as a person, and just the kind of coach he is. I know some people might be taken back by just how different he is than Pete, and how he's more of like he's a lot more aggressive in terms of his coaching style, and he's a lot tougher on players. But just that strive and that standard, I think that's really what's been lost around here, and where me and you have just been so frustrated the last several years. So to come out and like learn more about and have Brady really give you an insight into what's going on inside the building right now, I found it just super enlightening, super encouraging. I'm just so drawn to Macdonald right now.
Completely agree. And, you know, in the previous seasons where we've had these issues with the Seahawks, and sometimes the issues such as the defense going really bad, it would get to sort of the halfway point in the season, it would go wrong, and there'd seemingly be no fix for this. And Carroll would tentatively be asked about it. I mean, increasingly in his press conferences last season, he was getting very tetchy about any kind of probing questions about things that were not being fixed. And he would say, we've got to make a turn, or we've got to get it right. And there wouldn't really be any answers there. And you never felt confident that he was going to get this right. Now, the difference now with Macdonald is if he is prepared to go up to a rookie and say, we would cut you right now if it wasn't for the guaranteed money on your contract. That is the kind of thing that Carroll would never say. And it gives me a bit of confidence, Jeff, that let's say there's a game, let's say it could even happen on Monday night where the tackling's really awful, maybe even a couple of games. The fact that Macdonald is getting on the players, especially the younger players, because of a conditioning test at the start of camp, makes me think that he will not accept if there's a problem and he will make sure that it gets fixed. And increasingly with Carroll, I never felt like problems were going to get fixed. And then the other point of this article that really stood out to me was the note that he had only hired 4 out of 24 staff members who he'd worked with previously. And by all accounts, I've no idea if he was particularly close to all 4 of those people. It was just that they happened to have been on the same staff as him, maybe at Michigan, let's say, such as Jay Harbaugh. Certainly when Jay Harbaugh was appointed, there was no me and Mike are best friends moment in a press conference with either of them. You know, they happened to work together. So he's brought in, according to the article, people who he felt were teachers. Now, I felt that was a very telling point of the article, whether that was Brady asserting that himself, Brady Henderson, who did a great job with the piece, or his sources maybe within Seattle that were sort of suggesting, hey, by the way, look at that. Because you only had to look at Carroll's staffs. Every time there was a defensive coordinator change, he went from Gus Bradley to Dan Quinn, who he'd worked with. Dan Quinn was a success, but then he goes to Chris Richard. Then he goes to Ken Norton. Then he goes to Clint Hurt. It was always somebody who had been around Carroll. It was very different with the offensive coordinators, but it was always somebody that he was comfortable working with to run his defense. And then you had things like Tater coming back to the staff. His sons were on the staff. When Michael Sean Dugar asked him at a press conference, who keeps you accountable? And he name checks Tater and his sons. This was just not ever filling you with confidence. And when I read that article, Jeff, I just thought, do you know what? Things are not going to be perfect this season. I kind of fear Monday night, if I'm being really honest. And I think we'll get onto that in a bit. And there's going to be a game, I've said it for weeks, there will be a game this season where the Seahawks are expected to win and they don't. And we'll have a bit of it'll be quite interesting to see how the fan base reacts to that. However, I could not be more confident in the direction of this franchise, whatever happens on Monday, and really whatever happens the rest of the season. I think they needed this kind of change, and I think they've got the right man in the job.
Yeah, you covered a lot there, and it's me and the thing that I've been most critical about with Pete over the years, and it's really come to light, is just his staff. I did not think he hired good enough coaches, and you going name by name by name there, and how he had worked with all of them. And it's not just Pete; it happens around the league. If people talked in New England about Bill Belichick, and they had Matt Patricia as offensive coordinator one year, which is completely absurd. But there's a lot of cronyism. Like if you look at Dave Canales' staff, it's a lot of guys from Pete's staff, and Shane Waldron brought all his coaches from, and Shane Waldron's doing a terrible job in Chicago right now. As me and you kind of joked about that, he's been much worse than I would have ever guessed. So yeah, you have to admire what Macdonald did. It was just so unique that he hired all these guys he's never worked with. Some of them he's never met. Like Ryan Grubb and him did not have much of a relationship. And they even talked in the article how Schneider was resistant to one of the high-profile coaches that he wanted to bring in. And they talked it out, and they ended up going a different direction. So it's so refreshing relative to what we saw at Pete, that we see around the league, just people bringing in their friends and people bringing in guys they know. It happens in all kinds of business. The fact that they went out there and just wanted, and I think you're spot on about Brady kind of influencing his own, either what he's hearing or, because Brady was on 710 today, and he made a comment to Mike Salk that the one thing you could probably take away from this year, and we're going to ultimately see, is how much better they're coached compared to last year. So I think your instincts were spot on, your journalism skills, and hearing that quote, and I've been joking around with some of the guys I talked to about that. It's just like when you watch the Dallas Giants game last night, or you watch some of the ugly games we've seen, and how out of control they are, and how they kind of look like the Pete Carroll. Like the Seahawks have had their issues. They have a ton of issues at guard. They did not play very well at certain times on offense, on defense, but they just look so much more buttoned up and so much more under control and so much better coached. And you can see what they're doing. They don't look like some of these other teams. Yeah, the game you talked about, they probably should have lost to New England, and that would have been a pretty disappointing loss over time. But I just feel so much better about the direction of the team. I just feel so much better. And I'm with you. I think this is a game they may have trouble, and there's some issues, I just think, with some of the defensive tackles out and some of their offensive line issues. This might be a hard game for them. But this is a good measuring stick for them. And yeah, you can't help but not be impressed with just how different it looks relative to what we got used to. And Pete has his strengths for sure. But some of the things that I got frustrated about, and as the league has changed, is you see the teams that have been winning with details. And that's what me and you have talked about. That was what I really wanted. And just the way they're utilizing their players. And you could talk about, we had some issues with their personnel, but Terrell Dodson, it's seamlessly been a really good addition. Rayshon Jenkins, really good addition. They're using their players better. Derek Hall, we're seeing big player utilization, which became a huge issue with Carroll over the years. Everything just looked way more under control, and you could just see where it's building. And that's so refreshing compared to where we've just been circling around mediocrity.
So a look at this game then. I get the sense against Detroit that it's going to be a game where Geno Smith's going to have to do what he did the last two times in Detroit and probably win Seattle the game. I think that the Seahawks defense is clearly going to be stretched. I was not encouraged by the news that Quinton Bahana has signed to the practice squad. He's a defensive tackle today, because part of me thinks with Bahana and Gottel on the practice squad, that there's at least a chance that both might even get called up to the active roster. There's been a couple of reports, Brady Henderson being one of them, and Jeremy Fowler at ESPN have said that the expectation is that Byron Murphy's going to miss a bit of time. So I think the chances of him playing on Monday are remote. And then with Leonard Williams, it's just radio silence, any info there, Jeff. My initial sort of thought was, oh, it's only a rib. And then I was listening to Mike Garofalo with Puck Sports yesterday saying, well, sometimes that can end a season for a big defensive tackle. Like if it's come off the bone, like that could be it. Now, the fact that he is in a t-shirt and shorts, I think today, some jogging bottoms or something at practice today for the walkthrough, even if he's not playing in this game, that is encouraging. I don't think if Leonard Williams was in, talking about a season-ending rib injury here, I don't think he'd have a big smile on his face on the practice field. I suspect he's probably more along the lines of bruised ribs or maybe something that they can manage down the line. Because I think if, I imagine broken ribs or anything like that, he's probably going to be at home. He's not going to be driving in to work and doing all that kind of thing. So that is encouraging. But it doesn't seem as if either's going to be there. That's a concern. But then at the same time, you look at the Lions, Frank Ragnow's not going to play their center. They don't have Marcus Davenport to play across from Aiden Hutchinson. Their cornerbacks aren't playing very well. I'm amazed that Sam Laporta has gone from being why does this never happen to Seattle? A player carted off the field and then full practice like a few days later. That never seems to happen for Seattle with their best players. And then Ken Walker's potentially coming back for Seattle. So there's a lot of things going on there, Jeff. And basically, it's a long-winded way of saying, I think one way or the other, it's going to be a shootout between Geno Smith and Jared Goff, unless Seattle's run defense is just that bad, which might turn it a little bit. And, Geno can win a game like this. He's shown that he can win in Detroit and he can win a shootout. But I think if Seattle are going to win, it has to be that kind of game again, like 30-23, 37-30, end-to-end, loads of points. And Geno just gets a few more than Jared Goff on the night.
Yeah, I think you covered that really well. If you've watched Detroit this year, and I have watched them pretty closely, they've looked just like a tick off on offense all year. They barely scored over 20 points. It took them the overtime. They struggled against Arizona, who's one of the worst statistical defenses in the NFL. And they're just looking a little bit off this year. And it was against Tampa. They lost the game they easily should have won at home. And they completely pissed that away. And they couldn't score on a defense that was really banged up. And last week, they adjusted their strategy because Jared Goff's been struggling with turnovers. And they just ran the ball 40 times, and Arizona was basically neutralized defensively. But they're usually, like, with all that talent, St. Brown, Gibbs, Laporta, that's a team you think would be pushing like 28, 27 points a game. They looked explosive at times last year. They've been struggling. So Seattle's going to have to try to win a game like that if they can get out ahead and make them one-dimensional. Because if you get into a slugfest with them, there's so few teams with good offensive lines right now, but this was one of them. Detroit has what I would say is clearly the best offensive line in the league, but the center news is big. Frank Ragnow is out for this game, and he's probably a top 3 center in the league, and they don't really have a capable backup right now. So their split stats last year when Ragnow was in and out were huge. This is where it's a little unfortunate. We don't have Murphy, and we don't potentially not Leonard Williams in this game. But if you get into like a slugfest, they have the 2 tackles and they can just run the ball on you. Seattle does not have the offensive line talent to win like that, and Walker's coming off an injury. So this is a game where Seattle is going to have to win. It's kind of how they went in New England. Either the defense just shuts them down, which is possible. Like Mike Macdonald completely shut down Jared Goff last year. They crushed them. But that was outdoors in Baltimore, where Jared Goff has struggled outside of the dome. Conversely, Detroit plays a ton of man coverage, and their cornerback grades, as you alluded to earlier, are one of the worst in the league. And so Seattle had a lot of success against New England playing man coverage, and that's where JSN and DK got deep, and JSN was really tormenting those guys. And some of the zone systems have slowed down Seattle's receivers a little bit. So the one man team we saw in New England, they could not handle Seattle's receivers, and Geno ultimately carried that team to win the game. So there are a lot of areas where you can like build up a Seattle win in your head, where Macdonald did shut down Ben Johnson last year. He shut down Jared Goff. Jared Goff is not playing well compared relative to last year. But I just think of a game where a team has an offensive line advantage that much, and Seattle's missing 2 defensive tackles. And Jonathan Hankins played a hell of a game last week, but I think this is a big step up in talent versus Miami, who's one of the worst offensive lines in the league. So I think ultimately Seattle's won these like coin flip games in the last 2 years. I think the odds are probably it's going to push the other way. But we'll say this. In those 2 games, Seattle has played some of the worst defense. If you remember like some of those 2 games in Detroit, their defense in those games were absolutely abysmal. Like Jamal Williams ran for like a 70-yard touchdown. And like TJ Hawkinson had like 200 yards in one of them. It was some of the worst defense you have ever seen if you want to watch like bad Pete Carroll tape. So with Mike Macdonald and like their emerging defense, there's some reason to hope, but I'm with you. I just think this is a game where they're just going to get got a little bit. And I think it's going to be close, but I would pick Detroit in this game.
I would pick Detroit as well, but I think you're absolutely right. That it's very easy to sit here. I think it's one of those where if it was in Seattle, I'd pick the Seahawks.
Yeah.
It's in Detroit, I'll pick Detroit. I don't like. I get it that Seattle have won the last 2 games in Detroit, but that doesn't mean they would win every game in Detroit if they played each other every year. You know, I do think there is. I think the Detroit Lions are too good to play as badly as they have done so far, and for that to carry on, they will have a get right game. But I do think there are reasons, like you said, to think the Seahawks can win. It's not like a lost cause or anything like this. And it would be amazing. Like if the Seahawks could win this game, Monday Night Football, to go to 4-0, that would be a massive statement to the rest of the league and the direction of this team. It would be, I suspect that if the Seahawks win this game on Monday Night Football, however it happens, that this will probably be the highest the Seahawks fans have been, probably since their last playoff win against Philadelphia. I don't think there will be a more satisfying sort of feeling to be a Seahawks fan than if they could go to 4-0 by winning this game. And it's funny, really, because I've spent a couple of weeks now, Jeff, sort of wondering whether PFF is a bit of a spent force. But I'm looking at it now, and it does, I have to say, it passes the eye test with the Lions. So Jared Goff is currently ranked 30th out of 33 amongst quarterbacks.
Wow.
He's been struggling. You know, he has really struggled. Probably should have struggled even more. I mean, he could have lost them the game in Arizona. Like they had a pick 6 called back because they said it was at the 2-minute warning, and it was shown on replay to have been snapped a second before the 2-minute warning. So he should have had a pick 6 there. He had another horrible interception. It's just that the Cardinals, for some reason, who've been this high-octane offense for the first couple of weeks, couldn't do anything. So, I mean, maybe you have to give Detroit credit for that. But then you look down the rest of their team, you know, the receivers are not performing particularly well, including Amon-Ra St. Brown, 73.2 grade, 20th out of all receivers. You know, the running backs, though, are having a lot of success. David Montgomery is currently the top-ranked runner in the NFL, and it's very easy to see why, because he's running behind Frank Ragnow, who's, you know, not up to his usual standards pre-injury, but 71.8. He's not going to be there, though, for this game. Kevin Zeitler is ranked 7th amongst all guards with an 81.1 grade. You know, Seattle loves some of that right now. Graham Glasgow is 19th among guards, 70.5. Very good, decent in both pass and run. Taylor Decker's a 73.1. Again, 19th amongst tackles. You can live with that. And Penei Sewell's being Penei Sewell. Is the 5th-ranked tackle, 83.6. So you have an offensive line which is across, you know, 1 to 5. There isn't a hole there. There isn't one player who is a massive liability, let's say, like Anthony Bradford has been for the Seahawks. And that is the big, big difference. And then you look at the defense, and again, it paints a bit of an interesting picture in that you have got obviously players who are big names and are doing pretty well, like Aiden Hutchinson, who's got a great grade, Kirby Joseph. But then you've got a lot of players, Jeff, who are not doing particularly well. You know, the secondary is a bit of a weakness area for them. They've got Brian Branch, who's doing okay, 20th ranked safety. But then there are players like Terrion Arnold, who's ranked 91st out of 95 cornerbacks. And he was one of the players who was linked with the Seahawks right before the start of the first round, when it was believed that, you know, the likes of Byron Murphy weren't going to be there, and maybe they would take a cornerback in the first round at number 16. So I think it's, can you protect against Aiden Hutchinson? If so, you've given yourself a chance. If so, you'll give Gino a chance to attack that secondary, and that'll give you a chance to put some points on the board. That's going to be the key. And then on the other side of the ball, it's can you prevent Detroit from controlling the clock with their ground game? And if you can even stymie that, no one's saying they need to restrict them to 75 yards, but if you can just stop them getting 185 like New England did, you've got half a chance. And the other final thing I would say, Jeff, that's perhaps reassuring for the Seahawks is it's a massive blow to not have Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy. But both players, I would suggest, will be missing more their pass rush impact than their run defense. And for a game, like for one game, can Jonathan Hankins just play his best football next to Jaron Reed? Can those two stop the run? I would suggest yes. It's not going to be easy, but arguably your two most stoutest, harder to move defensive tackles are going to be playing in the game. So can you at least have a few answers there for the run? And, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that they will be able to just do a bit of damage as well up front.
Yeah, and I think that Hankins was brought in really to help just buoy the run defense while they were easing Murphy in. And Jaron Reed's been a little quiet so far. He's been solid, but he hasn't really flashed. I think they will miss Williams the most as a pass rusher, like you said. I think what really can throw Jared Goff off is just, especially with Ragnar out, is just pressuring him instantly up the middle. Detroit's really good on the edges. Their tackles are Sewell is probably the best, maybe the best tackle in the entire league right now. I don't know if his PFF grade reflects that, but he's just a dominant force. And it's a game where the Seahawks are probably very happy not to have Darrell Taylor. So they would attack him, and they've attacked a lot of Seattle's weaknesses. Some of them has been like Kobe Bryant playing them and Julian Love playing them last year were awful. So this is a game where they're going to need to be a little better. But yeah, Hankins and Reed could hold up in the run game. The big question is how are edges going to do? And that's where if Chenna Nwosu comes back, that could help a little bit because they can be a little, and some teams have attacked Seattle on the edge in the run game so far. And it's not always up the middle. Hankins really struggled in the New England game. He was missing tackles at the point of attack. This is a game where Hankins is going to need to flash because they're going to need to go head-to-head against a guy like Zeitler, who's just a pro, and some of their other veteran guards. They don't have a lot of flaws in their offensive line, but if they have a weak center, that's something that someone like Jaron Reed could take advantage of. And he was one of their better players last year on the defensive line. This is a game where he's going to need to really step up. I don't think Murphy's going to play. I saw the reports. I've had hamstring injuries. It takes a couple weeks. And the worst part is there's nothing you can do. It's just rest. There's not rehab. It's very frustrating because you look fine. You don't have a wrap on your leg. And yeah, so if they can hold up okay in that matchup and just not get destroyed on the edges, there is a recipe for them to win the game and almost win comfortably if they can disrupt Goff. Because, yeah, PFF is totally right in terms of Goff has not flashed at all this year. Like, it's been a struggle for St. Brown. Laporta's numbers are way down. Laporta was like, if you did a fantasy football draft, the number one tight end, and he's been producing nothing close to that when he's been healthy. So they have not been effective. They've been trying to get Jameson Williams going since that first game, and they've kind of lost themselves a little bit offensively. And it's going to be interesting, obviously, from a Seahawks perspective to see Ben Johnson versus Mike Macdonald, as those were their finalists for their job. So this is just a fascinating game, and you would love to see the Seahawks at full strength, especially in the defensive line, the defensive tackle group, and they're pretty thin there. Like, I don't know if Draymond Jones is going to have to kick inside more or Mike Morris, but they're going to need guys to really step up in this game to make sure they're just not getting run over at the point of attack.
Let's talk about the guard position and get that out of the way. So Anthony Bradford obviously has had an injury, but is now returned to training. Let me have a look. Let's have a look at the practice report. So he was a full participant today. So that would suggest that he is going to play in the game. Whether they spell Christian Haynes in or not is going to be interesting. So how do you feel about this, Jeff? Because we heard from Ryan Grubb, and I really appreciated Ryan Grubb's honesty yesterday in telling us that why Haynes is not playing, not strong enough and needs to work his technique out. So that was useful for two reasons. It kind of gave people an answer so that now people can stop wondering why Haynes isn't playing. Mm-hmm. But also it gave me a bit of a... Like, I spent all of last night watching guards in college football and I'm looking for the guys who are strong, the guys who
Yeah.
have kind of got that. Because I just get the feeling that maybe they'll overcorrect a little bit. 'Cause look, the draft is shaping up for the Seahawks to be an O-line draft.
Yeah.
Because I looked at the list of prospective free agents, and I don't see anybody, Jeff. And the ones who are there are going to get overpaid because we saw it last year. Like, I don't want to be the team that spends 20 million a year on Damian Lewis, and I don't even think there's a Damian Lewis in free agency next year. So unless guys get cut, and I do think that's something that we have to be mindful of. There will be players who get cut, and I think that as the lines are showing with Zeitler, there is some benefit to just going and getting an old, crusty old vet who knows what he's doing, who can fill a gap for a decent salary. But it's probably going to be another focus in the draft, and I'm looking for sort of stronger, bigger, and guys who are technically, putting their hands in the right place as well, because I think they might prioritize that in the draft. But how do we sort of feel about this situation? Because Bradford can't just, he's got to show something now. Like, he's got this chance. This is really, my message to Anthony Bradford would be, look at what Damian Lewis just got paid. Look at what Robert Hunt got paid.
Yeah.
Like, you have got 3, this is like this year and 2 more, you could make generational wealth as a 4th round pick from LSU. Go and nail this, man. You are too big and too physical to be this bad. Like, no one's expecting him to be peak Brandon Scherf at right guard. We're just expecting not to be a liability. And can he do that? I don't know. If he can't do that, it's going to be harder and harder for them not to just throw Haynes in and see how it goes. It's not an ideal situation, Jeff, but it is. I do look at that Lions line with a bit of envy. Their bookend tackles, their interior is pretty good. Obviously, Ragnar not being there is a big thing, but it does feel like the one thing that might just hold back this team. If they had a line that was just not as much of a liability as it was, what could they achieve this year? That is a question I'm asking myself more and more at the moment.
Yeah, and the more we play better defensive lines, I think that's really going to show up. Yeah, I think at the end of the 2012 season, the Seahawks came out of there just in the playoffs. They just had no pass rush, and Bruce Irvin was like their only guy. Chris Clemens got hurt, and they were just like a clear edge rush away from being. I wonder if this team just comes out and they're just the guard away from like being a Super Bowl level team. But it's much harder said than done. Right now, there's probably 20 teams in the league hoping to find guards, and it's just a major shortage right now. And Seattle went into the draft thinking they were going to draft maybe J.C. Latham in the first round as a guard, who's played left tackle for Tennessee, and they didn't think Byron Murphy would be there. They didn't consider that scenario really a couple days coming up to the draft. So they were going in, and oddly enough, Fautanu, a guy that me and you really liked, and they medical red flagged him, and he's going to miss most of the regular season for the same knee. So you see how hard it is to find guards, even a guy they knew they had the coaches, and they didn't have him on their board in the first round. So this is a huge offseason where they're going to have to, like, it's kind of like that 2012 where they got Averill and Bennett. I don't know if they're going to find that in free agency again. But like, there's a guy like Trey Smith in Kansas City. If he hits free agency, he's going to make like $20 million a year. And I don't see John Schneider paying that, that chance. So I hope they're not left finding a Laken Tomlinson or something like that, but they're going to have to attack this position in the draft. The disappointing part about Haynes is like, he was kind of an overage player where the advantage of him, and maybe this is why he slipped in the draft, was he had started so many games at Connecticut, and he was supposed to be more of a, I didn't think he had the ceiling of like a Cooper Beebe or some of these other guys, but he was just supposed to be like a steady. And what I liked about him and why I thought it was a good pick is I just thought he was going to be a steady player, which is what this guard group needs so bad. Just a steady player. Like, they don't need it. They probably thought Tomlinson was going to be the kind of what you thought of, like just like a veteran guy who's been there, and he whiffs on blocks so much. So the problem with Bradford is not only is he blowing in pass protection, like there's some sites that have him with like a 0 grade in pass protection, but the penalties too. He's taking 2 penalties a game, and he's one of the most penalized players in the entire league. And if you looked at those drives after the first quarter last game, how many of those drives ended up 3rd and 15 plus? And it was because of penalties, and they were holding, and they're there. So the fact that Haynes feels that far behind is pretty discouraging. I was just been like, okay, they got to get this guy in the field. I don't care if it's left guard or right guard. They just got to get this guy in the field. And then they hear his technique's not great. He's struggling with strength, and like you remember how he was evaluated at the draft. Everyone's like, this guy's just solid. Like, and so there's been a big learning curve that's been discouraging because again, he started so many games. It's not like he's a raw player like Bradford was. Bradford was more of a project when he got drafted based on his tools, and so many of those linemen have not worked out. And then you see all these guards getting overpaid. So few of them have hit, but Robert Hunt is playing outstanding actually in Carolina, oddly enough. They've been one of the better offensive lines in the league, but there's just so few guards available. And I know everyone's like looking for hope and trades, and the fact that they had to have Jason Peters come in on a look just as like tackle depth, it's pretty bleak out there. So yeah, you're right to study guards in the draft, because I think this is a lot like 2012 at the end where they have just one organizational need. And the thing is, it like impacts the whole team. Like when you consider how good their receivers are, and Kenneth Walker and Geno's splits when he's like properly protected is one of the more productive players in the league so far. But he's getting pressured at an insane rate again. That's not sustainable. And then we're lucky Aaron Donald retired. Let's just say that.
I was looking back at Haynes's physical profile, because what I really liked about him was that, you know, on tape he played with an edge.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that will really appeal, like I think we've come to learn that John, he's kind of an old, he's got an old school side to him, and obviously Steve Hutchinson's there as well, and I can imagine that, you know, easily Haynes would have fit into his mentality. Like there was a game that UConn played, it might even have been against Michigan, I think it was, where they were 40 to 50 points down, and Haynes was still playing the game like it was a 3-3 tie. Like he was still playing like every snap like it really mattered, and stuff like that does matter to it, rightly or wrongly. You know, stuff like that will attract certain teams. And then you look at his profile. You know, he had the length, tick. You know, athleticism, 503, 40-yard dash, hints at some athleticism, tick. He 33 vertical jump, explosive. You know, he ticks a lot of those things, but he's got small hands. Like, and he didn't have the biggest frame. Like he was 315 at the combine, and Anthony Bradford's playing at like 15, 20 pounds heavier than him. So you do just wonder a little bit whether, you know, whether they do just need to, like I've been watching Wisconsin and Iowa games the last, you know, did they almost just need to go and get a freaking Wisconsin and Iowa pair, you know, and just sort of stick them in there? You know, these guys who are big, bigger than most, who have just, like I was watching this this interview with Jack Nelson, who I really like. The internet does not seem to rate Jack Nelson, the left tackle of Wisconsin, but I think they're viewing him as the left tackle. I view him as a guard. And I think that when you listen to him, he said, like, my dad was an offensive lineman. My brother was an offensive lineman. Like, I grew up idolizing Michael Dieter, is it, from Wisconsin? You know, like, who does that kind of thing? Like, that's kind of what they need. They need someone who's just sort of came out of the womb an offensive lineman, and, you know, is just built for that sort of physical kind of football. And maybe they just need a couple of those guys up there, you know, that are just going to go on and brawl and get the job done. And Nelson playing left tackle has got a bit of athleticism to him. I just wonder whether they've got to do that, Jeff, because it's really hard to think how they're otherwise going to solve this. And in the meantime, you know, you've got Tomlinson there. Somebody mentioned that the Jets moved on from Tomlinson and went and got John Simpson. And you kind of think, yeah, with hindsight, Simpson's gone to the Jets. Now, he played in Baltimore, so Mike Macdonald would have had a good read on him and maybe just didn't fancy him. But he's got an average grade. You know, it's 65. But it's, you know, I'd take average now. And the thing is unlike the Damian Lewis's, he's on $6 million a year. He's on a 2-year deal. So it's not a huge contract. And you think right now, and also the other thing about John Simpson is, my word, he hammers you. Like you know, you're in a game. Like he is violent up front. He loves to smash people in the face and then let them hear about it. And you just think, if you put him up there now, like it'd be an upgrade. Like, and you don't have to worry about the technique. And he seems to fit the Huff style with that physicality. And that seems to be what they're missing a bit. And maybe Bradford can get a bit in there, you know, and, you know, go in and put your face in there a bit more, be a bit more aggressive. Maybe that's what they need to do here. I don't know. The other sort of thing, and maybe I'm just spitballing a bit here, Jeff, is the line that Seattle has right now feels a bit of a mismatch of parts. Like when you look at the line that Huff and Grubb had in Washington, it was slightly undersized, but very athletic left tackle, tall, big, but extremely athletic right tackle, 2 converted tackles at guard, and then the smallest center in college football. And it was athleticism and aggression. That's what Washington played with. And they won the award for the best offensive line in college football last year. Now, Seattle have a very athletic left tackle. They now have a very athletic right tackle. Whether you like him or loathe him, Stone Forsythe is a former left tackle in college. They have a center who is somewhat the NFL version of Parker Brailsford in terms of size. But then they have Anthony Bradford and they have Laken Tomlinson, who have been guards the whole time. And you think they're not quite, they're the two players we're all talking about, and they don't really quite fit. So it makes me wonder whether it is just, sadly, going to be a wait a year to see how this shakes up. But that is so frustrating, Jeff. We talk a lot about offensive line. Seahawks fans generally talk about the defensive line. You never want to be in a position where you think, if only we had a guard or two. Like, that's a really frustrating place to be.
Yeah, and I don't know if you could see me cringing when you were talking about John Simpson, but that was the guy I targeted for months. I thought they need to get physical in the run game. He played with him in Baltimore. He was kind of a bust drafted by the Raiders, and he started to emerge a little bit later. So maybe Bradford, if he can mimic anyone, it's that guy. But I just thought for his price point, I thought he was the perfect get for them. And I don't know if he wanted to not fly his family out here or playing for Aaron Rodgers is pretty appealing, but man, that one hurts because he's played pretty solid. Like, he's been fine and he's been a good run blocker. And I think they've missed out, and his pass blocking has been pretty competent. And if he made like $12 million a year like Lewis did, or if Robert Hunt, I'd understand, but he was like $6 or $7 million. And so that one hurts. It's going to be interesting. Zach Sinter is going to start this week at guard. One of the guys that me and you loved in the draft. Wyatt Teller got injured. Funny how karma came around on that. Same injury as Nwosu. It's so funny. So he's going to start. And if he comes out and he's a player, they had him right there. He was picked a couple picks after Haynes. And Dominic Pooney started out really strong. He's come back to life a lot in the last 2 weeks. And so they thought, like, they went to the draft again, thinking that J.C. Latham might be their pick. So guard is not like a position they're scared to attack. I know they were high on Tyler Linderbaum a few years in the draft, and they almost traded up for him. The year they ended up getting Boye Mafe, which turned out to be a great pick. But
they like the guy at Dallas as well.
Cooper Beebe was the guy they tried trading up for.
Cooper Beebe, and who's the other guy that they took Dallas in the first round? The tackle who's
Tyler Guyton.
No. He's gone to left tackle. It's the guy.
Tyler Smith.
Before. Tyler Smith.
Yeah, he was a Pro Bowl level guard. So they've identified some of the right pieces. They just haven't aggressively attacked it enough. And now you're left with this mismatch of pieces that doesn't fit. You said it well. The guards don't really fit with the tackles. And it just seems like they're throwing shit against the wall and seeing what sticks. And frankly, that's half the NFL right now. But you look at like the Packers and the Colts who've really identified this position, and the Lions. The return on investment of like highly drafted offensive guards is really strong. And I know John has talked about they're overdrafted, but if you look at like a lot of the all pros and centers and guard and how many players have just come from the first round, it's a lot of them. There's not a lot of misses there. So like you see that guy in Atlanta, Chris Lindstrom, he was like 14th overall, which shocked everyone. And Zach Martin was taken over. Johnny Manziel was shocked everyone. And it's been a Hall of Famer. So you're obviously can find a Jason Kelsey in the 6th round or an undefeated guy, but like if you're searching for that, good luck. And just you see Damian Lewis was as average as it got, and he got paid like a difference maker. And he's just a guy, and he's got some raw skills, but so they need to adjust their approach on this. I'm still disappointed they didn't prioritize a veteran free agency that was better than Laken Tomlinson, who was a bottom of the barrel player with the Jets last year on the worst offensive line in the league.
Well, with that, it kind of felt almost like crap. We've got nothing left. Who's out there?
Yeah,
he'll do. And then when he came in, you end up thinking, well, that can't be it. And well, no, it was. And he's never really been tested, has he? There was never any real competition at left guard. It was just they signed him, and then here we are. I mean, the quote from John Schneider that we picked up on, and a lot of people did, that guards are overpaid and overdrafted, is going to linger. What I would say, though, is it kind of makes you wonder a little bit, if they thought JC Latham was their guy, was there a bit of misdirection there? Maybe there was. I mean, maybe that's giving John Schneider the benefit of the doubt. But as you mentioned there, they were. John Boyle wrote it in the article. They were thinking of trading up in the draft in 2022 to get an interior offensive lineman, and it seemed that Tyler Smith and Tyler Linderbaum were the two players that they'd be willing to do that for. It didn't work out. They took Boye Mafe. It doesn't matter. The rest history. That looks like a good pick, Boye Mafe. But it does, and then with Latham, that they have been open-minded about drafting an interior offensive lineman early, and there are, this is not a bad upcoming draft for that area, because you do have, I'm just looking at the board that I'm building at the minute. I still think Tyler Booker is a very good option for them from Alabama. He's a left guard who has got the athleticism to kick out to left tackle. They've played him there in relief because of injuries in the last couple of games. But he's a for me, a week one starter at left guard, high character, athletic, from a 5-star recruit. And if not him, you could look. I don't think I always butcher his name, Jeff. Jonah Savine Anea from Arizona. I don't know if that's to pronounce it, but he is not a tackle. Like, if you watch him, he's not a tackle. He's playing right tackle for Arizona. He's not a tackle, but he can be a very physical interior lineman. I think he'd be a terrific guard. You've got Donovan Jackson at Ohio State, who's always flattered to deceive, but has got an unbelievable physical profile. You've got Jack Nelson, who I've talked about. I don't think Will Campbell at LSU is a tackle. He's got sub 33 inches. He's got short arms. I think he's a guard. I don't think he's going to go as high as some people think. And then you look at, there's a whole bunch of these, they look like they work in a farm in the off-season types. So you've got like Jennings Dunker at Iowa, who's the right tackle, who will probably play guard in the NFL. You have Tate Ratledge. You have Dylan Fairchild at Georgia. You have Armand Membu, who will kick inside from Missouri. There's a whole bunch of these, what I would call scheme fits, who've got tackle experience, who can be physical and kick inside and maybe will fit. So I think that's a good side of the thing for next year. For this year, though, it doesn't help an awful lot. If you have a super chat and you've got a question or anything, send them in. We've got this from Glenn. Glenn, big thank you. Thanks for supporting the channel. If you want to do that like Glenn and just support us, then send something in. Or if you have a question for Jeff, or if you just want to make a point that you want everybody to see, then get your super chats in. So while we're sat here talking about guards issues, Jeff, and injuries for both the Seahawks and the Detroit Lions, just before we came onto this live stream, you pointed me in the direction of a tweet from Adam Schefter, which said that the 49ers left tackle Trent Williams did not practice today due to a toe injury and is now being listed as questionable for Sunday's game against the Patriots. So this is on top of the news that Christian McCaffrey has gone to Germany and may miss the regular season. That is the buzz now, that he might not play at all this season. They've had Deebo Samuel banged up. They've had George Kittle banged up. They've had Brock Purdy banged up. There's probably others that I'm missing that have had injuries. There are all sorts of issues there. The Niners feel like they're in a bad injury place. So the question I wanted to ask you, Jeff, is, do you agree? I saw Brian share a tweet earlier, which was a group of individuals on Twitter declaring that this is a season too far for the Niners. And I must admit, I winced a little bit when I saw that, because I thought, please do not start writing. Do not put a chip on this shoulder of the 49ers. Let them, if this is going to be like a season too far, let that happen and we'll talk about it afterwards. Let's not give them any incentive to prove people wrong. But is it a season too far for them? They've played almost a whole extra regular season compared to other teams because of their deep playoff runs over the years. They do have some aging players. They do have players who have now been paid a lot of money and are getting a lot more injuries. All of a sudden, it feels like Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan are not a lot else for that team, and a bit of a running game. So how do you feel about the San Francisco 49ers, who are suddenly 1-2 after blowing that Rams game in the most hideous fashion last weekend?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm gonna not declare them done yet. They just have too much blue chip talent for me, but the thing with them is I did have some questions about their depth this year. And a lot of it just comes down to drafting. They missed on full draft classes, and they had some good like depth draft picks this year, but they didn't have like we were worried about them drafting an offensive tackle in the first round, and now they didn't. They have one of the worst right tackles in the league statistically so far. And they draft Ricky Pearsall, who's like a total luxury player. And obviously he went through some stuff in the summer. But you look and like they just haven't added a lot. Like defensive line wise, they lose Eric Armstead and now Javon Hargrave, who you didn't even mention. I don't know if in that little opening, Javon Hargrave's out for the year, and he had one of his best games of the year. And I don't count them out because I just think Brock Purdy's really good. Unfortunately, I think like the statistics and like the fact that he's been willing to play pretty well without this like all-star cast of weapons, not the best sign for the Seahawks. That him and Kyle, I'm always going to think they have a chance. But the big difference to me, and I think this is very real, is when you watch them play the last 2 years, and when you watch them play like Pittsburgh in Week 1 last year, they just looked like a juggernaut. And you saw it a bit in that Jets game Week 1, but the fact that they lost to like the skeleton version of the Rams in a game they had like 93% win percentage with like 3 minutes to go, like that's not the Niners we remember. Those guys would just run people over. And like you started to see some cracks last year in the playoffs. Like they should have lost to the Packers and they should have lost to the Lions. And they just haven't replenished that depth. But I'm with you. I don't want to get ahead of myself. If you remember that Leonard Williams trade that drove us a little all nuts last year is when the Niners went on that losing streak. The Seahawks were in first place after barely beating PJ Walker. And they're like, okay, we got this. Like, let's make a trade. I don't want that to happen yet. I want to see the Niners have a pretty light schedule coming up. They play the Cardinals and they play the Patriots this week. And so, yeah, things are not going there. There's some vibes issues. And there are some things in the offseason I just didn't like what I saw from them. There's something in like sports called like the disease of me. And it's usually what happens when you start winning. And you start to think about yourself and put yourself out of the team. We've seen it with Brandon Ayuk. He's not the same guy. He's been really focused on himself. They're banged up. But no, I'm not quite there. Like, this is cooked. These guys are done. Like, Kyle Shanahan, Brock Purdy, Fred Warner, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa. I'm not counting those guys out, unfortunately. They're the team I would hate to see in the playoffs.
Completely agree. I think the thing is, though, is there are a few things that I think we could enjoy, though. Like, I can't help but when I was doing the Ravens-Lions for radio over here last week, and I didn't fully appreciate Brandon Aubrey's backstory, that basically he's like at nearly 30. He was sat watching a game with his wife who said, you could do that. He's like an ex-soccer player. And then he just took up kicking, and now he's, well, apart from that one kick at the end yesterday, he's been like automatic from 50 plus. And how the Cowboys got him, and then you compare it to Jake Moody for the Niners, they spent a 3rd round pick on that guy. Like, if you're spending a 3rd round pick on a kicker, you want Brandon Aubrey. Like, you don't want Jake Moody. I mean, famous last words, touch wood, there's not going to be any jinxing there against the Seahawks, but he's going to kick the game winner in both games or whatever. But look, I'm just saying. So you've got stuff like that going on. Like, the Niners, I do find them quite amusing. The Niners, you know, like Rob Stats-Guerrera and Grant Cohn and stuff like that, you know, when they're going over the top, you know, and the criticism a little bit, but it's amusing for non-Niners fans as much as it might be cathartic for Niners fans. But, you know, they're mentioning how often certain players are getting snaps, you know, over others, like, you know, certain receivers, and like Ronnie Bell with his 41.7 PFF grade, you know, and then there's players like Brandon Ayuk who had all that offseason of drama, got paid, and is delivering the 60th best receiver performance after 3 games, you know, and they get bailed out, though, because then, like someone said this, like Brock Purdy's currently leading the NFL for PFF at quarterback with his grade. Yeah. You know, you've got Juwan Jennings, who's the 5th best receiver, who's playing brilliantly. You know, they have these guys, like, they seem to like have these bad moves, like bad, expensive, either in cost or draft picks moves, and then bail themselves out with genius moves. It's like they're such a, imagine if they just had genius all the time. They'd have Patrick Mahomes starting instead of drafting Solomon Thomas. They'd like, I mean, it's crazy what they
could have had Micah Parsons too. Yeah.
I mean, they could be unbelievable. Yeah. And they are still amazing, or have been amazing, you know, and yet could be even better. And then you look at that defense, and this is the thing for me, Jeff. If there is anything that is going to, you know, curtail them, It's what do you think of the Niners like at their best? It was just, oh my God, I don't want to play that defensive line. There's Eric
That was
Armstead, DeForest Buckner, there's Nick Bosa, there's like even players like D Ford rotating. You didn't want to play them. And now that Hargrave's gone out, you're quite right to remind me of that. You've got Malik Collins, who's currently rated 36 amongst defensive tackles, and then you've got like Kevin Givens in there and Jordan Elliott. They're kind of saying, thank goodness they signed Jordan Elliott. I'm kind of thinking like our late move was Jonathan Hankins, and they're like praising desperately glad that they signed Jordan Elliott. Like Bosa is almost now a one-man band in that regard. And it does. I'm like you. Like you watch them against the Jets and you think, same old Niners, they're going to be great again. But losing that game the way they did against the Rams, and I watched the end of it, they just looked pathetic at the end of that game. A little bit clueless.
You know what it's like? I see a lot of vibes between the 2015 Seahawks.
Yeah.
And they still had all those. 2015, we still had all that talent. But there was like the game they blew to Cincinnati that year. You remember that? Where they had like no business losing that game. And they almost lost like the Detroit game where like they hit the ball out of the end zone. And they lost some games that are just that year that were just unexplainable. And then they picked it up at the end of the year and we thought they might make it to the Super Bowl again, and they might have. But I see a lot of similarities, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but on paper, they still look great. They still have the shell of the roster. Obviously, they lost the Super Bowl, similar to the 2014, obviously not in the same heartbreaking fashion, self-induced, but they still lost in pretty heartbreaking fashion. And I see a lot of similarities so far where the team's still good. They're still talent. If things go right, they can still be good. But there's cracks that just weren't there. And I think you said it so well, the defensive tackle group. The defensive line was just so scary when they had all those top 10 picks and they could just destroy you. And then their speed at linebacker, they don't have Drake Greenlaw still. Their corners haven't been very good. Their safeties gave up a 97-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson. Sam Darnold was throwing the ball. They could have crushed that. Aaron Jones fumbled at the 1-yard line in that game. They would have won that game by 3 scores. And so just to see them like punked by another team, which we never see, and then lose to like a shell version, that just hasn't been there. Like we just haven't seen that the last 2 years. So that's where I see a lot of 2015 Seahawks. Again, very talented team. I thought they were going to make the Super Bowl again, and they probably would have won the Super Bowl had they made it against Peyton Manning's like dead arm. But they're not the same. And they're still good, though. And that's right. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
We've got 2 super chats, and there's one final question I want to ask you as well, Jeff. So we'll get into the super chats because we've got a couple of good questions here. Hawks fan Mattman says, more of a general NFL question, but when do you think the quarterback salary bubble might burst? I can't imagine owners want to keep overpaying like this. I think this is the topic of the NFL right now. Mm-hmm. On top of why are the injuries happening, but then, plenty of people will say, there are always injuries, and I've not studied the comparison between the first 3 games this season and others. So with the quarterbacks, Jeff, you look at Trevor Lawrence, crap, but paid like an elite player. Jordan Love's got injured. Even Joe Burrow's not playing at an unbelievable level. Tua's injured again, got paid. Jared Goff got paid, 30th out of 33 ranking quarterbacks on PFF. It feels like it was almost like a death knell for your early season form to sign a contract extension this summer. Now, the other side of that is, doesn't Sam Darnold look good? Doesn't Geno Smith look good? Malik Willis has won back-to-back games for the Packers. And I get the feeling there's going to be a lot of owners in the league who are thinking, do you know what? We don't need to suspend $60 million a year on a quarterback. We just need to get the right offensive-minded coach and give them a toolsy player. And maybe there'll be an overcorrection there. Perhaps some deluded team will give Sam Darnold or Malik Willis a big contract in the offseason, or a reasonable contract, try and plonk them next to a Kubiak's son, and they'll think that that's problem solved. And maybe that will not be the answer, Jeff. Mm-hmm. But that has to be in the mind. If I was an owner right now, if me and you were joint owners of a team, and we had like a bottom-dwelling team right now and didn't have a quarterback, or we had a young quarterback who was middling, you couldn't help but wonder, do we pay this guy a fortune or do we just go and try and get a coach quarterback combo like Darnold and O'Connell in Minnesota? Because that is the question for the NFL right now, because quarterback play is not good. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, is leading the league. If you have the right coach, put the right player paired with that coach, you can have success without spending $60 million a year.
Yeah, I saw Mike Sando write this as well. So, yeah, the return on investment, there's got to be a lot of buyer's remorse right now around the league. And I've never understood like the urge to just do these deals so fast. Like a lot of people are like, just pay Geno. I'm like, why don't we see it first? Like if I'm Trevor, like if I'm the Jaguars, like why don't we see it? Like what's the urge to pay him? I don't know if he's going to hold out or something, but he does not look close to a $55 million quarterback. He looks closer to somewhere in the 20s, and who knows? Yeah, you see, and we've seen what happened with like Baker, and we've seen it with Geno, and they were the first ones in that like middle class. And the Vikings must be thrilled they didn't bring back Kirk Cousins because they were in that negotiation. And they've gotten far better play at Darnold for a fourth of the price. He made $40 million. Darnold's at 10. And so, yeah, if I'm these owners, I'm thinking we got to build an offensive infrastructure and set up for a quarterback. We've seen what's happened with Darnold and Geno and Baker. Like it's got to be weird for like the Jets, that two of the best quarterbacks in the league so far this year are Darnold and Geno, and guys who just flamed out in New York. And Carolina had Baker and Geno on their team, and then Carolina all of a sudden spends on their offensive line. They put Andy Dalton in last week, and he looks like a pretty competent quarterback. And so if I'm an owner and I don't have one of these Mahomes, or if I have a Josh Allen, I'm paying him anything he wants. But if I have in the middle class, I want to spend that money on offensive linemen, on a quarterback kind of coach, someone who can develop the quarterback. We've seen it with O'Connell's been one of the best coaches and probably the most underappreciated great coach in the league. And Matt LaFleur has been unbelievable. The Malik Willis, if you watched him play in the preseason, he looked like a guy who would end up in the CFL. I was joking. He was going to end up in Toronto with me in the CFL, and he's been 2-0 for them. And Jordan Love, the one game I saw from him, he didn't look special. Obviously, I think he'll be fine. But $55 million a year for a guy who had 8 good games. And then Dak Prescott's like the probably most polarizing one, but I don't see him as a $60 million player. I just don't. He's a good quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but Dallas is left with no alternatives. And if I'm these teams, yeah, I'm more willing to take a shot and just building up my infrastructure and letting a quarterback succeed. And we've seen it with like Jared Goff, where he had to be the whole team and he couldn't do it. And when he had the proper infrastructure, he almost took them to the Super Bowl, and he's been into a Super Bowl. So that's where I would be at. I would be very willing to kind of, and I'm waiting for that first team to be like, okay, we're not paying this guy. And maybe that's the Vikings, but they still drafted JJ McCarthy in the top 12. So I don't know if they're the team, but I'd be very interested in taking that route. I do not want to keep paying these guys. And I think it's like the worst thing in a salary cap league to pay good or okay players great money. I think that just hamstrings you. And you look at the Jaguars, they were just uncompetitive, and that salary cap hasn't even hit yet. It's the first year of the deal. So they're hoping that Trevor Lawrence is elevating all these guys, but I just haven't seen it. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I would be looking at building infrastructures for quarterbacks to succeed. And if I don't have one of those dudes, I'm totally fine just taking that $10 to $15 million player.
Question here from Hawks Zero. Any right tackles you would want the Seahawks to take in the draft? Obviously, depending on Abe Lucas. There are some good options. Emory Jones at LSU has not played anywhere near his best football. He's very aggressive, though, has better length, very natural right tackle. It's not someone I'd want to take very early. I think he's being overrated in some mock drafts, but certainly somebody, at the end of the first round, if the Seahawks end up picking there, if they trade down, that sort of top 45 range, I think that's the way that he's playing at the minute. More potential than performance based on what he's shown so far. For LSU, he and Campbell have both been a bit disappointing this season. I think, apart from that, I think Jack Nelson can play right tackle. I think Ursary at Minnesota can play right tackle. I think that maybe some teams will put Jennings Dunker at Iowa and think that he can stay out at right tackle. Same for the guy at Arizona. I personally think they're better inside. So, and I even think you could probably, maybe, I really like Josh Simmons at Ohio State. He's their left tackle. He's brilliant in pass pro, very athletic. If they want a very athletic right tackle, he could do that as well. But it's a major mystery. Like, who knows what's going to happen with Abe Lucas? I mean, like, you hope that he comes back, Jeff, but we just don't know, do we?
No. We were hoping but he played a bit last year. You were hoping, okay, maybe he'll be PUP by week 5, or they're building him up, and now Brady's kind of leaking. They're hoping for. So that had to be a pretty significant injury. I wonder if it was like a patellar tendon where you just don't know. Because he posts these videos and he looks in great shape. So it's more getting in the football shape. And I don't think you could just say like, okay, I know in 2025, Abe Lucas is going to be like a productive right tackle. We're obviously going to see what happens and where he develops this year. But if you're one of the Seahawks scouts, that's got to be an organizational concern and an organizational need. If he proves us wrong, great. But I don't think you can go in thinking we're legit solved the right tackle.
Yeah, I think it was ideal to bring George Fan in and give him that time, and then bloody George Fan gets injured.
Oh my God!
I mean, that's the ideal thing to do again next year, to bring somebody and you think really happy with that, but then they have to stay healthy, whether it's Fant or somebody else, and obviously with Fant not going out, so it's created a bit of an issue there. But Stone Forsyth has not been terrible, so that's worth.
He played well last game.
Big thank you to Matt and to Hawk Zero for those. One more super chat. Big Mike says, do you guys think there's any chance the Lions line Hutchinson up outside even once, or just over our guards every snap? So I think he's joking that they might line him up inside. The one thing I would say about that, and I really appreciate that, Big Mike, for the super chat. What I would say, Jeff, is if Aiden Hutchinson is ever lined up against Anthony Bradford, like if I was Bradford, I'd be licking my chops. You've got like 80 pounds on that guy. You've got a chance to floor him. Just get into him really quickly, send him on the deck and sit on him. Like that would be a great way to take Aiden Hutchinson out of the, you can fall on him, if you block him right up front, like it's a chance to deliver some punishment. But I do fear that they aren't going to line him up. Like with stunts and stuff, he can do it all, Hutchinson. So he could be a problem there. But it may well be. Look, they do not have an incredible interior defensive lineman or a great edge complement to Hutchinson. So Hutchinson can still wreck a game. He's got like 6.5 sacks already, Jeff.
5 in one game.
He is. Let's hope he doesn't do that on Monday. But if you can limit him to like 1.5 sacks, you've got a chance.
Yeah, they lost the game. Hutchinson had 5 sacks, which is pretty ridiculous. It showed how bad Jared Goff played in that game. I don't know many teams losing with a guy with 5 sacks. But yeah, I think if they line him up inside, it's almost easier to double team him that way, and they'd have such a numbers advantage. I don't know if that's the best way to attack them, but yeah, they're going to throw some stunts at him. The Seahawks are lucky, and I think the rest of the league is kind of lucky. The Lions have tried to invest in this defensive line, but they quite haven't not found that like partner for him. Like they paid a lot for Marcus Davenport. He's out for the season now. DJ Readers are really good. It's like a souped up Jaron Reed, I'd say, but he's not going to like dominate you in the pass rushing game. He's just a good defensive tackle who's really good in his multiple spots around the league, but he's not going to just like throw around Lake and Tomlinson. That's not his style. If they had a Hargrave or something to pair with Hutchinson, that would be pretty scary, but they don't really have that guy. The other guys are more like space eaters. Like there's a guy from UW, Levi Ozarike. So they don't have like that kind of quick interior rusher who I think those guys, like if you remember Jeffrey Simmons just tossing Lake and Tomlinson from that joint practice. When they play those kind of defensive tackles this year, like we got Dexter Lawrence coming up next week, who was pretty quiet last night, but that might be a scary game for the Seahawks. That might be a harder game than they need it to be.
The final thing I wanted to ask about, Jeff, and I'm conscious that we've done an hour already, so I don't want to keep you too long, but the thing I was going to ask you about is the Seahawks still have, and look, a lot of teams have a lot of cap space. The Seahawks still have $12.2 million, which has often meant, they're keeping their options open for stuff this year. I wish Curtis could, if he was in the chat, if he is, maybe he can tell us whether a lot of that 12 is just being earmarked to roll over. Because they are currently, I think, according to Overcap, in the red for next year by $1 million. Yeah. So they might need to roll some of that over. But I'm intrigued. Do you think, like last year, they were extremely aggressive before the trade deadline? Do you think there's any chance of that this year, or do they roll it over? Because look, they are going to have some money next year. I don't know what they're going to do. As time is going on, I don't think that they're going to extend Geno Smith, whatever happens, short of an MVP level season, Jeff, because I think we have to remember here that Geno will be 35 next year. Yeah. I think it is going to be a year-to-year type of thing. If you extend him in the offseason, you're then committing to his age 36, 37, maybe even 38 year. Mm. And if you look over time, historically, 36 is the year when play starts to regress, physicality starts to regress. I'm not sure that you want to commit to someone at the age of 37. I think what they might prefer to do is say, okay, we've got you contracted for next year. Let's talk at the end of that season. You hit the market. We gave you this deal. There are lots of incentives attached to it, so you can earn quite a lot of money. His cap hits nearly 40 million next year. I'm never one of these people, Jeff, that feels like a team automatically has to reward somebody as soon as they have sometimes it is okay for a team to be rewarded for a savvy move.
Yeah.
And if they're making a bit of a save, and it's not a lot of a saving for his cap hit next year, but if they're making a bit of a saving compared to maybe some of his peers, I think the team should have the opportunity to benefit from that and then get to the off season after the 2025 season and make a call. Do we want to extend you for another year or 2 years? But we'll make that decision then, not now, because he's not 27. He's 34 in a couple of weeks. So they're going to have to, and also they'll want to keep their options open, I think. So I don't think they're going to do that. So they might need a bit of money to counter the fact that DK is going to cost a lot. Gino is going to cost a lot. There's probably other players. I've got it up here. What are they going to do with Tyler Lockett? Draymond Jones is going to be expensive next year. Leonard Williams and Uchenna and Nwosu are going to be expensive next year. They're going to have to make some savings somewhere. They're going to have to roll some money over maybe. So how do you sort of view that? Because in the past, they've been aggressive. Could they be this year? I think maybe the lack of obvious targets might be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think they're just in a situation where they can be flexible. I think they have a new cap guy, and I know Curtis has done a really good job just analyzing their cap, but they did things a little bit differently with some of their last deals where they put in some void years and things they haven't done, and they've structured things a little differently. So I think they're willing to be a different kind of aggressive in terms of how they've made a lot of cap mistakes with Matt Thomas, who's no longer here, and I wonder if they just got tired of it. So they are flexible enough where if they see a deal they like, and the tricky part about trading for like in-season offensive linemen is even if you're bad, you tend to want to keep your offensive linemen because you're generally trying to protect a quarterback. So there's not a lot of teams. It's the opposite of like when a pass rusher or defensive lineman, like if you're Carolina this year and your team sucks, like you don't care if you can rush the passer, but you do care if you can protect your quarterback. So they have to get very fortunate where just someone would have to slip through their radar, where just someone had access, like maybe like a Cleveland or something where Zach Zinzer maybe can play and maybe you can get rid of one of their guards. So I think they have the flexibility that if something does come up, they can aggressively pursue it. But again, it's a hard trade to win because there's going to be 15 plus teams who are going to want to get that guy. So it's an option if it comes up. But I think ultimately, yeah, you're right. I think they're going to ultimately be trying to roll that money forward. They have a lot of highly priced players, and you mentioned DK. He's going to be looking for more money. If he keeps playing like this and hitting these big touchdowns, he's going to be getting a $35 million a year contract potentially. So, and the thing with Seattle is they have a lot of money coming due in the next couple of years. Because of how good these drafts are, unfortunately, that's going to be punish them. Where Rick Woolen now looks like one of their best players after a down year last year. Witherspoon, Mafe, Hall, Cross is like playing like a $25 million a year guy. It's obviously only been 3 weeks, but I'm sure John in the back of his mind is like, God, I got to get a rookie quarterback in this building. And they have a lot, and they're going to have to pay guys, Boye, Hall, all these guys are top of the market kind of contracts coming due, and they're going to have to figure that out because that's when probably Nwosu and Lockett and Williams might come off. But at some point, if they keep extending Gino forward, they're kind of wasted these rookie contracts. So they're going to have Cross and DK and Woolen and Witherspoon and Mafe. They're all going to get a lot of money in the next 2 to 4 years.
And I really respect the way Geno Smith has played in the last 3 weeks. And I think you agree, Jeff, and he's played very well. But I will just say again, a reminder that when John Schneider was asked about Geno Smith, is he still the starter? His response was, he's the starter until he isn't. It was extremely non-committal. And I think he might feel like they do need to go young at that position eventually. But it will have to be the right player. And I think it's convenient and a great thing for the Seahawks to have someone like Geno Smith until they find that great player, whether that's in the next draft or the draft after or whatever it is. it does buy them a little bit of time. Okay, final super chat's just come in, so we'll do that before we go. Given how well Pooney is playing in San Francisco and drafted after Haynes, and Grubb's saying he's weak, how much more patience should we have with JS drafting O-line? Appreciate the super chat there. What I would say about that, Jeff, is one, Grubb didn't say he was weak. He just said he's not strong enough in the minute. So I guess, maybe that's me being pedantic, but there's a difference between someone being weak and not strong enough, I would say. And then the other thing I would say is Dominic Pooney played very well against the Jets in a game that the Niners dominated. His last 2 games, so the other 2 games this season, his grades have been in the 50 to 55 mark on PFF. So that would suggest he's not played well in the next 2 weeks. So I think it's important to just point out that Pooney might have had 1 good game, really, out of 3. So maybe we shouldn't rush to judgment there. But finally, Jeff, before we let you go, how much more patience should we have with John Schneider? I think it is frustrating, and maybe they need to look at what they're doing on the offensive line a little bit closer than they have been. But I do think that John Schneider is a massive net positive for the Seahawks. If this is his blind spot, as frustrating as it is, I would overlook it to the extent of trying to hope that he can get this right, rather than feeling like we have to apply any pressure to him, given the good work he's clearly done elsewhere on the roster.
Yeah, like when you draft like 2 top of the line cornerbacks, 2 to 3 edge rushers, defensive linemen, receivers, in the last 3 drafts, if you look at like who they've taken and who they could have taken, the positives are very strong. Like there's not a lot of like obvious misses there. And now that like Derek Hall's emerged as a player you thought he was, and he's looked dominant against Miami, it's hard to just say like there should be pressure on John Schneider. I think we need to give it a little more time in terms of the offensive line with this regime. This is a totally different regime. We'll never know how much Pete Carroll and his staff were involved. We know Tom Cable was very involved in their offensive line draft picks. And we know that they've only had really 1 with this coach, and that was the year where the coach didn't go to the combine. He was trying to get his staff figured out. I think we need to see what if Grubb and Huff are around for a while. I don't anticipate Grubb getting a head coaching job. I'd be pretty surprised. He's an older guy. I think he needs to kind of prove himself. So I think they're going to be around for a while. I think you need to give it more time. I don't see any scenario where there's pressure, but obviously this is clearly a blind spot. If he was just drafting like he was in 2013 to 2021 and the 2017 draft, the 2021 draft, have some of the worst John Schneider moments in his career, 2017 specifically. If you look at all the players they passed on and how cute they got and who they could have had, but they have to figure this out. This is obviously going to be an organizational priority, but it's something the Ravens specifically did really, really well. So I want to give this thing more time with this coaching staff. And obviously, I don't think Schneider's going to be under any pressure unless this whole thing's like just everyone bottoms out or something. But I think the good just outweighs the bad by so many levels.
Well, we've solved the problem anyway, Jeff, by saying just go and draft a Wisconsin and Iowa offensive lineman. They seem to do okay. Anyway, Jeff, thank you. Really appreciate it. It's an hour and 15 nearly, so massively appreciate everything that you've done there, Jeff. Enjoyed us this Friday to preview the game and talk through some Seahawks topics. Thank you to everybody who sent a super chat in. Thank you to everybody who has watched this live. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. There's loads on there, some draft article, big draft article from midweek, and then I wrote something quite quick yesterday about the Maryland quarterback who I think is worth keeping an eye on. So go and check that out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Again, 40% of you are watching the videos and not subscribing. So help us out. Give us a subscribe. You will then not miss any of the videos or the live streams that we do, and it really helps us out. If you wouldn't mind giving the video a like, that would be a massive help as well. If you could leave any kind of comment, even if you just say Go Hawks in the comment section, that can also help. And one final reminder to check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com. We'll be back after the game on Monday night to reflect on everything that happened against the Lions. But for now, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.